Hammering, sundering, and quite literally crushing your enemies under a slab of stone is an immensely fun way to spend your time in Lords of the Fallen. Combining this with the ability to bully your enemies with a relentless wall of heavy hammer swings make this build an absolute banger of a build for those of you who enjoy a slower, high-damaging melee style of play. If you want to play as a relentless, strength inferno melee character that has the ability to 1- and 2-shot even the toughest of enemies via uninterruptible colossal hammer swings, all whilst doing so in the image of the late great Harambe with an undead flavour, then this unstoppable, relentless undead primate is the build for you. Phase Shifter here, and thank you for checking out my Harambe's Revenge build. In today's video, we're breaking down what is, in my opinion, one of the best two-hander hammer builds in the game. It does consistently high damage and maintains a frightening ability to dismantle even the toughest of mobs in the game. We'll be going over the stats, weapons, armor, rings, pendant, umbral, and rune choices that make this build an absolute joy to play. So, without any further ado, let's get into it. For the primary weapon, I am two-handing the Queen's Head Hammer. This choice centers around its exceptionally high damage output at +10, its ability to reliably stagger enemies on its opening attack, and the fact that it also does very respectable fire damage, and this also gives the weapon another dimension to its damage output. It's also a hybrid scaling weapon, which makes it more reliable in an NG+ environment. This weapon primarily focuses on physical damage, which opens up some interesting interactions when considering our rune, offhand, and umbral choices. More on that later. This weapon is acquired using the Sundered King's Remembrance. In the offhand, I use Geoffrey's Dagger. This gives us 3 meta rune slots and allows us to gain a flat 30% physical damage increase, which I will cover in a moment. The 3 rune slots available in each of these weapons are integral to the functionality of the build. A combination of 5 Gravix and 1 Balago rune is the approach I take here. Across the 2 weapons, 5 Gravix runes gives us a flat 50% damage increase when two-handing a weapon, and the Balago rune temporarily lowers target's physical defense when struck, making this a lethal, synergistic combination. Other options here include a Tummel rune for life on kill, Shon for increased elemental damage, or a Dahalwi or Markev rune for increased scaling potential. It should be noted that Shon runes can only be acquired once per playthrough, and could actually be a better choice in certain areas of the game. Those of you that are min-maxers should definitely consider this when approaching rune allocation. In the early game, the main stats to focus on are Strength and Inferno for damage scaling and Vitality for survivability. Initially, you'll require around 20 points in Endurance to have ample stamina to utilise in the early to mid game. My advice here would be to get Strength to 75, Inferno to 50, and Vitality to around 40, and then fill in the rest in any order of your choosing. In terms of rings and pendants, our pendant of choice is the Warrior's Claw. This increases our physical damage and physical defense and ensures that we are optimizing the physical damage output when striking enemies. The ring choice are very straightforward. 2 Adir Quamaya runes increase our damage output when two-handing a weapon, making this a no-brainer alongside our other physical damage buffing choices. So, when combining all the additional physical damage buffs, we are getting this from 8 different sources. These all stack, and you can see the acknowledgement of this in the top left of the UI. What you're left with is an incredibly high-damaging, brute, undead primate that is satisfying and very devastating to play. However, there is another great interaction which really allows us to take advantage of our single target damage output. If you socket the Umbral Eye of Loash into your main lamp socket, you gain the ability to charge heavy attacks, and in that window of time, all the damage received is taken as wither damage. It also makes your posture unbreakable. So, in essence, when you charge a heavy attack, it can't be interrupted, and any of the damage that is taken that becomes wither is simply regained back when you land your heavy attack. These attacks usually 1- or 2-shot enemies and make this a very lethal approach when dispatching the more sinister and challenging enemies in the game. In terms of catalysts, I'm using Queen Sophisia's Catalyst. At +10, this comes with S tier Inferno scaling, and the spell power is just shy of 700, and it also has 5 spell slots, a simply sublime choice here. You can acquire this from completing the Tortured Prisoners quest line, so if you're looking for other options, the other 3 Inferno catalysts will do just fine. Roga's Heart, Searing Accusation, or Miranda's Touch are all viable. Speaking of spells, our spells are what really tie this build together. The first 4 choices are pretty set in stone. We use 3 Adir Shout sorceries. Number 1, Adir's Endurance, which gives us an insanely quick stamina regen, which ensures we are able to sustain our onslaught of attacks consistently. This can be acquired from Damaros during her quest line. Once you give her the Adir's Worshipper's Sword during an infernal ending playthrough, so definitely avoid extinguishing any torches if you want this one, folks. Our second choice is Adir's Rage. According to the Fextra Life wiki, this gives us a flat 10% damage increase for 90 seconds, and upon testing, I do believe this to be accurate. This is again acquired from Damaros during a quest line for the infernal ending. Our third choice is Adir's Hardiness. This gives us a flat 25% damage reduction for 90 seconds, an incredibly powerful spell, particularly for those of us who like to play Lords of the Fashion and value style points over defensive stats. This is located in the Bell Room doorway next to the Bell Room waypoint. Once you've reached the arena where you fight the Bell of Tenacity boss, follow the staircase on the left, and with a bit of searching you'll find a door that can only be opened with the Pilgrim's Perch key. The spell is in the chest in there. Our fourth spell choice is Infernal Weapon. This imbues our weapon with even more fire damage and synergizes really well with the previously mentioned aspects of the build. Our fifth spell slot is flexible. I use Infernal Slash most of the time. This does insane posture damage to a lot of enemies and is really fast. A high damaging cast that can be weaved into an attack burst or immediately after a dodge to keep pressure on enemies. It also builds up burn. You could also use Infernal Guardian. This summons a fire spirit that launches bolts of fire at your enemies intermittently. You could also swap this out for ranged spells such as Lava Burst or Infernal Orb if you'd like to keep a ranged element to your gameplay style. The choice is entirely up to you, folks. And now for the most important part of the build, the Lords of the Fashion heads will look on eagerly. If you are interested in the way this character looks, I am using the Jadil Skull Helm, Jadil Bone Armor, Jadil Bone Gloves, and the Cursed Leggings. These are all using their default colouring. In terms of mechanics, buff yourself with all 3 shout sorceries, imbue your weapon with Infernal Weapon, and pop a mana cluster and a Brio Stone for good measure. Select your target and try to gauge whether it's better for you to get your attacks in before your enemy or bait the enemy's attacks first. You're likely to 1 or 2 shot most enemies, so the question is always about when you can achieve this without taking damage or as little as possible. The aim here is simple. Try to get the opportunity to land either 1 huge charged heavy strike or seize the opportunity to land 2 successive strikes via the use of the weapon's special attack moveset. This can be deployed using LB and RT. It does around 6 to 8k damage per strike if you land both cleanly. Absolutely devastating to pretty much any mob in the game, folks. Infernal Slash is also useful in this build to finish off enemies quickly when perhaps your attack animation would leave you open for taking unnecessary damage. This build only face tanks when you're using charged attacks. I wouldn't recommend these unless you're facing a single target and you're really confident you're only taking damage from one source. This build is all about finding damage windows and taking the opportunity as soon as possible. Sometimes it will actually benefit you to duck and weave between offensive and defensive approaches. Speaking of weaving amongst your enemies, if this particular element of the build interests you in Lords of the Fallen, check out my Fungal Plague Doctor build. This utilizes a duck and weave playstyle along with causing insane damage amounts via leveraging status effect build-up. It's extremely fun to play. There's a clickable link on the screen now that's part of a larger playlist of different build guides that cater to everyone's taste. Head on over and check them out now.